done it twice. The second live stream of root cause analysis using the 5 whys and a current reality tree and evaporating cloud. This time I'm with a very, he's not old, but he's an old colleague. We go back, what, to 2004, right? When we,
yeah, the Bush campaign, yes.
yeah, met as hired political mercenaries in our vibrant young 20s when we still had hope and energy for the world. But, you're doing something really cool now, 3D printed homes.
Yes, I'm trying to. I aspire to shift from conventional development to 3D printed construction, and hopefully today we'll talk through some of the challenges and give each other some useful information, hopefully.
Perfect. Well, I know you watched a little bit of the live stream with Sharon, so you know the process. We're going to give you a chance to complain about the biggest complaint that you have. Let that kick off our 5 whys, have some conversations. We'll take the output, go over to a new chat, and use it to create a current reality tree and an evaporating cloud, which are 2 thinking process tools we use to identify what the problem is and where it is that we can start to focus our efforts. So if you're ready to get started, what is your biggest complaint right now?
So it would be easy for me to say that the biggest complaint is regulatory problems, but that's not entirely accurate. I think that as a developer who's trying to 3D print houses and to produce a product that's 3D printed, the biggest challenge that I'm finding is, we work in an industry, from the initial civil engineering, architects, surveying, grading, all the way through buyer's agent, seller's agent, title, escrow, where there's usually a really clear-cut path where you go through that process. Everybody has a generally assigned role, and they're really comfortable with that role. But when you kind of reinvent the wheel, all of those processes are a little bit different, and I'm finding that it's hard to continue the momentum and to keep that process moving when I think there's just a lot of inertia and hesitation on the part of so many they're good people. There's nothing that anybody's personally doing wrong. I think that they just don't really, I'm going to have to go all the way almost to the end to find out, are these classified as real property? They're not going to be classified as personal property, right? Can they get insurance? Are we sure that we can get, VA loans and things? And that may actually impact, the footing and the grading and how we build the sidewalks and things. And so I'm kind of asking a lot of people for a lot more time that normally would fit into their certain amount of free initial consultation time that they build into their regular business model. But I need 3 times as much from every single person along the way, or probably more than that, probably 10 times, because what we're doing is potentially so much different. And so I'm kind of forced to ask people to work for free to some extent.
Gotcha.
And I think that that's one of the hesitations for, the civil engineers just going to maybe put me on the back burner, even though they might be excited about this in real life. They're like, well, I'm tired of talking to the guy 10 times a day for a project that's still 2 years away from breaking ground.
Sure. Now, is it, because I can kind of understand that with AI, right? Because we do all of this AI building and coaching. Nobody really knows how to understand it and the normal workflows of everyday work. Is it literally just the same experience that people don't know? I mean, fundamentally, 3D printed houses are the same thing as a traditionally built house. They have electricity, they have water, they have structural integrity. They just have a different material process, right?
Sure. Yeah. I don't know if saying that they're exactly the same structurally is entirely correct. It would be sort of equivalent to a cinder block wall to some degree.
Okay.
From a structural point of view. But it is quite a bit different structurally than the conventional, stick built housing that everybody's used to building. So
what I mean by that is they have walls, they have a foundation, they have roofs, they have to be structurally sound. Now the physics of it might be different, but
Sure.
fundamentally they serve the same purpose. They have building processes that are pretty well defined,
Mhm.
and it's just a building process that nobody has ever been exposed to.
Sure. Yes. Mhm.
Okay. And is it fair to say, and I'm asking you to confirm an assumption based on just the little bit that you said, that because nobody has ever been exposed to this building process before, that is why you need their time, because you have to literally educate them at the same time that you ask them for feedback on what you educate them for.
Correct. Yeah, and it's amplified in difficulty because I'm also asking them to educate the building department, and the surveyor needs to educate, the fire inspector, and a lot of cross communication that is difficult to facilitate and like follow up on. Right.
Gotcha. Is there, you mentioned cinder block construction. Is that enough of a corollary that there's learning there that can be cross applied to the 3D print builds?
It may be closer to like a poured concrete wall.
Okay.
It's a hollow product rather than a solid product,
Gotcha.
and it's different. I mean, it's just an innovative product. It's really heavy. We've got to amplify some of the footings, and there's some question about how the buildings are designed and engineered in such a way that allow the machines to actually pass in and out of the construction site.
Gotcha.
So there's a few different things. There's a lot that's similar, and
Sure.
very few people are like, no, I don't want to have anything to do with this. A lot of people are really excited by it initially and on paper, but then when it's like, boots on the ground, like when I want you to go out to the construction site and actually let's talk about what we're going to do, then there's a lot more hesitation. Like, well, I need to get a feasibility study. I need to hear more about the science, things like that.
Gotcha. How much, and again, I'm asking for curiosity here. How much heavier, just in terms of percentage, would a 3D printed home be versus a traditionally built timber frame home? 20% heavier, 50% heavier, twice the weight?
I would say that it's probably weight wise, it's going to be similar to a poured concrete wall. And that's going to partially be because one of the goals here is fire resistance or fireproofness. And so we would want the ceiling to be a metal structure rather than a wood frame structure. So you're going to get a lot of cost savings in terms of the ease of building and the ease of putting it together. But you do gain weight, and there's pluses and minuses, but the end result is a lower dollar value for the sales price.
Gotcha. Okay. So all of that said, all very good information, stuff that I don't really have much insight in at all. So thanks for sharing all that. And just like you saw with Sharon, we're going to provide that as the initial analysis. And it will now start to give us 5 why questions that we can investigate. And these are purely investigatory. They are designed to spur thinking, spur conversation. These are not the questions that give us the answers. So the first why question that we want to ask, we can choose, combine. Why does introducing a novel construction method cause momentum to stall across these professional disciplines? Why do professionals who are initially excited about 3D printed construction become hesitant when they engage? Why does 3D printed home development require significantly more time and education from each professional stakeholder? Why is there no established framework or workflow that professionals in civil engineering, title, lending, real estate inspection can reference when working on these? Or why does uncertainty around classification, insurability, and financing downstream create friction upstream at the early stages of development? Any of those, which of those 5 questions stand out, excuse me, to you as the one worth investigating the most? And literally, follow your hunch. That's the best thing I tell people to do here.
I think that my hunch is number 5 because of just the sheer frustration level that I often face with, like, I'll almost have to persuade, a heavy contractor to be involved or a finished contractor. And then a month later, their interest is gone because, like, it just fizzles away. I guess
No,
I suppose that, okay.
Perfectly fine. Yeah. And, let's go ahead and investigate that. And we'll say again, question 5. Okay. And as the process did before, we're now moving into some analysis of that question that we asked and the uncertainty around classification. In a conventional development project, you've already identified this. Your intuition has already told us that these questions are so well defined in traditional building methods that it's common knowledge at this point, right? You don't have to ask those. Like it goes down to basically saying it creates friction because people are asking questions they're not used to asking.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. At this point, it's instinct. It's what we call intuition. They've developed it. They understand it. It's why it is that before with Sharon, who's a realtor, and me, who is a licensed realtor and serves as a marketing agency for realtors, I knew all the intuitive questions or answers that she was giving me, but I don't have it here. Right. It's why I have to ask you questions to explain basics that are knowledgeable to you, like concrete pours versus timber framing and using the metal and how that impacts pricing and all that. So it's fair to say that intuition, because it doesn't exist, it creates that frustration, that fragmentation of knowledge here. And because there's that fragmented knowledge, we have a cause and effect that moves upstream. From a TOC perspective, there's a clear pattern of that lack of intuition causing problems that cascades upwards, because you need these contractors to be able to provide educational information to downstream financiers, insurers, agents who are knowledgeable about property, lawyers who are involved about property law and the transfer of real property versus personal property. You need all of these people. They can provide that education, but it just creates this friction all the way through the stream. It's only natural, right? Excitement on paper, hesitation to boots on the ground. That explains why, because the people downstream that know can't take the time to educate the people upstream. The people upstream don't want to take the time to be educated by the people downstream, because learning does not pay the bills initially.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. It takes time, and time is money, especially in the building industry.
Yeah. The whole industry of real estate development is kind of everybody gets paid on a production basis rather than an hourly basis. And so you're asking people to work for free.
That's it. Yeah. And it's funny. You're not exactly asking people to work for free, but the value model is different.
Yes.
Because again,
they'll get paid when we build houses.
Yeah. And so there's no intuition as to how it is that they value that, which leads us into our second why question that we can investigate. Of the 5 here, why have lending institutions not developed clear underwriting standards or classification criteria for 3D printed homes? Why does the absence of a single resolved financing precedent create a cascading hesitation? Why are regulatory and classification bodies moving more slowly than the technology itself? Why does each professional stakeholder wait for another party to resolve the classification question rather than collectively as a single party taking ownership of it? Or why does the lack of insurance and actuarial data prevent financial instruments from making necessary project lender ready instruments that they can use? Which one of those stands out to be worth investigating?
Let me just think for a second.
Sure.
Let's talk about number 4.
Okay, perfect. And again, the same thing I said with Sharon, I'll say with you. The nice thing about this process is that it makes you the expert that's the missing piece, right? I have the discipline, I have the process. I use this every single day, all over the place. I use it with my 5-year-old when I'm trying to get her to explain to me why it is that she's angry at that particular time. Uh, I have the discipline, but I have nothing about this that I know. So you just by sharing and thinking out loud helps us to get to better answers. It's the beauty of this process, and it's the greatest way to make AI work because AI has all of this discipline as well, but it doesn't have what's in your head. So now that we have the analysis here and building off of that, the waiting game, right? Each stakeholder waiting for somebody else is a very recognizable pattern inside of TOC practitioners or with TOC practitioners like myself. It happens when everybody can see a problem, but everybody just kind of sits back and waits for somebody to take responsibility for it. And again, the intuition that people in traditional development methods have, because it's been used for so long, those questions have been answered for decades. Because it's second nature, nobody knows how to go through the process of assigning responsibility for answering a particular question and how that feeds into the downstream or upstream role players who know how to do what they're doing when it comes to a traditional timber frame house, right? Where you pour a concrete foundation, you inspect the concrete foundation for what it needs to be doing in terms of structural integrity, all the way up from fire safety, just like you talked about, right? Those handoffs break down because nobody's developed that intuition, nobody's developed that trigger. But also from a Lean Six Sigma perspective, there's also a measure, like because there's no intuition, there's no measurement. So in other words, we don't even know how to define variability from good build versus bad build.
Sure.
We don't know how to intuitively understand what a good measurement perspective is. And so you could have a builder like you that builds one way, you could have a builder in another state that builds another way, or even 2 different builders in the same state who are just kind of doing their own thing. And how do you know which one is right and wrong? Which, taking all of that, leads us into the next series of questions that we can answer. And why is no single entity? Why has there not been any sort of, when I think single entity, trade association, or even the existing associations, why have they not taken on the role of establishing these shared standards and frameworks? Why do professional disciplines involved in the development process not coordinate cross-functionally when new construction types are developed? Why is the financial risk of being the market leader, the first person to take a risk in resolving these classification questions? Why do they almost entirely land on the developer, people in your position, versus everybody else downstream that stands to financially benefit? Why does the conventional development process have no built-in protocol for handling these types of projects that require novel education to develop novel decision-making for new building types? Why is there no process to do that all at once? And why do professional stakeholders, liability frameworks discourage people from developing and engaging deeply to develop that logic, that understanding? Which one of these questions stands out the most worth investigating?
1 and 2 look like they're kind of the same question, and maybe 2 is phrased in a better way. So we can maybe talk about number 2.
Okay, perfect. And this is a perfect example of saying exactly what you just said. 1 and 2 answer kind of the same core question in a different way. So let's combine the questions, but let's make it centered around number 2.
Okay.
And I would tell you, That's also kind of where my eye was starting to go to. So I think we're thinking along the same lines here in terms of where the intuitive thought process is taking us, which is kind of cool about this process too. The more
Yeah.
people instantly learn, the more that they start to develop that intuition rather quickly. So let's focus on 2 as the primary, but combine with 1. And so far, has all of this analysis kind of confirmed or at least helped to organize your thoughts on what you've been experiencing thus far? Is it getting you to
Yeah.
you getting you to some level of clarity? Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So the absence of that coordination mechanism, whether that be an organization that takes a lead or that common knowledge, right, reveals that the development process itself was never designed to handle new things. It was never designed to be innovative.
Mhm.
In other words, the process right now is stable, it's secure, it's profitable for everybody that's involved. Why change something that
Sure. Yeah.
works, right? Which explains quite a bit. The roles, the handoffs, the triggers, the entire workflow from concept to transfer of the title to the first owner of the household. Very well defined. There is no financial incentive that people can immediately identify as being a market leader in this regard. Now, there's probably people like you that can conceptually see the financial incentive.
Mhm.
You could probably come up with projections, right? You can talk about forecasts of what it's going to happen. You could even probably compare the prices of building materials, but it still doesn't define the entire process. So it's hard for people to wrap their head around, right?
Sure.
And which goes back to what this middle paragraph is saying. All of these downstream concerns, it's all conceptual, and therefore it's purely intuitive, and it can't even be validated until somebody takes that first step. So from a TOC perspective, it has no, you have no method, you have no process for taking this constraint that clearly exists, is pretty well defined, that lack of experience and intuition, and actually doing what we call elevating. In other words, making that constraint ridiculously profitable. There is no mechanism to define that profitability. There's no mechanism to logically demonstrate how a test might work to prove profitability for folks. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind, because now it's starting to get us to the point of what you can probably do to resolve that particular constraint.
Mhm.
So, but let's continue to dig a little bit deeper, because once we get the deep with the 5 whys, we can start to answer that with a little bit more clarity. Of these 5 questions, why does the developer end up bearing the weight of the cross-disciplinary coordination? Why does the 3D printed construction industry not yet produce, or why hasn't it produced a transferable body of precedent? But this is intuition. Why is it that folks like you can't instantly say, all right, I need to teach you X, Y, and Z so you understand 1, 2, and 3? That's essentially what that says. Why do the incentive structures make deep engagement with this novel construction type seem and appear initially irrational from a financial perspective, even though they can see and probably understand and have some excitement about the long-term potential? Why does the development industry have no existing innovation policy or innovation pathway? Why is it that people don't want to change, essentially? And why is the coordination burden created by novel construction methods invisible to the larger building industry ecosystem? Which one of those kind of stand out the most that's worth investigating?
I would say in terms of trying to get things done, number 3 probably strikes me as most
Okay. Perfect. So now we're starting to nail it down, right? And this is why this innovation, and this is really for any industry, but especially why it's acute here, is that because there is no understanding of the new intuition, the new cause and effect, the new logic that's able to intuitively demonstrate profitability to people, that there is a mismatch between what people experience now and what people will experience afterward. The common goal between the thing we want to change from and the thing we want to change to, the common goal is we want to be profitable. The difference is we want to be more profitable after we make a change, and there is no way to answer that question. So the development process, your engineers don't know how it is that they're going to make money. And you've talked about this. You're asking people to do 10 times more work with no clear end goal of getting paid 10 times more money at the end of it, or more a better way of saying it, of making 10 times more profit, right? Same with lenders, same with real estate agents. Like, I mean, from an agent's perspective, if the house is cheaper to build and it therefore cheaper to sell, what's the incentive for people in the real estate industry to market those types of properties, take those kinds of listings, right? That incentive structure, there is just that fundamental mismatch. And what makes it structural is the fact that business models have been built around what people know, right? Because it's predictable. So you're not just simply saying, here's a novel construction type. You are actually saying, here is a novel business model. And people are like, well, we're happy with the way things are now.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Perfect. So, and that analysis kind of confirms that right there. So we're going to dig a little bit deeper on this foundational root cause and we can ask, why has no profitability model emerged that allows people to be paid for being novel, for being paid, for being compensated, for there being a profit margin in education or pioneering work? Why does the developer, again, we're coming back to that, bear the cost of building the entire new ecosystem? Why is it up to you to take all of the risk? Why is the gap between conceptual excitement and operational commitment so difficult to bridge when the reward for early participation doesn't exist? Why does the absence of a single completed, fully documented 3D home transaction, from grading like you talked about to title transfer, make it impossible to construct a credible financial model? And why does the innovation risk in novel construction fall almost exclusively on you, the developer, rather than being shared across these disciplines? Again, from my perspective, and again, you tell me which one to investigate, but I can tell you, having no knowledge of this, but just learning about how all of this works in this analysis, for me, it is a combination of 1 and 2.
Yeah, I would agree with that. They're kind of asking the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I would almost personally, I would focus on 1.
1, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So again, that's the nice thing about using AI to help facilitate these conversations, is we are now speaking a similar language, and I have no idea about the construction methods whatsoever. Right.
Sure.
But we're learning, we're teaching, we're conversing, we're building intuition on the fly, which is the beautiful part about this. Before I enter this in, you're learning by the process of just doing this, you're learning the discipline you can use with people further downstream. So rather than taking 10 times more, taking 10 times the time to evaluate this, you can use this similar model with these downstream partners and upstream partners to start to investigate what they really need and why they see what they see. Secondary part of the question. Perfect. And like always, I always lose count on the question we're on. I think that was the 5th one. And as you can see, this is developing an understanding of really the root cause here is not the novelty of the building itself. It's a language around how that novelty is profitable. You see it, you understand it from one perspective. All of these roles see it and understand it from their perspective, but it's like people yelling at each other in different languages, right? I know when somebody yells at me in Spanish, whether or not they're upset or whether or not they're happy. The same with French, the same with any sort of Chinese or Mandarin or Japanese. You can tell by tone of voice, but there's still a lot lost in that translation.
Sure.
And because there is no Rosetta Stone, to use the metaphor, there's no way for us to actually build a common vernacular, a way to interpret. It just requires a lot of talking and conversing and listening in order to develop that language. But again, we've come back to, from an R&D, from a profitability perspective, there's some profitability risks there. And so from the perspective, from your perspective here, is from TOC, and especially lean, you can't even identify what bad knowledge is from what good knowledge is. Or
Sure.
a better way to say it is, what's a wasteful conversation that actually answers questions and what's a helpful conversation that actually answers questions. There's just no way for you to identify that, because there's no way for you to identify it yet. You can't communicate it, and therefore it makes it hard for people to understand. The language is just entirely different. And this leads us to the next series of questions. And this should, again, I think my count is 5. I hope it is. But why does the absence of a shared transactional vocabulary for this novel 3D printed building make it impossible to define, price, or commit to their role? Why is the developer the only party in the ecosystem with sufficient end-to-end visibility to build that profitability language? Why does the development industry have no existing model for compensating pioneering novel forms of building, right? In other words, why is there no discipline around making change? Why does the concentration of innovation risk in a single party, the developer, make the overall system fragile, slow, and resistant to change? And why is the first fully documented grading to title transfer of a 3D printed home the single most leveraged event in breaking the entire system constraint, which is preventing it from happening? So in other words, why does it require everything to be done before you can build a model to explain it? Which one of those stand out to you the most worth investigating?
Well, it seems to me that 1 through 4 are kind of similar in nature, and then 5 is rather different. But I kind of like the way they're phrasing 4.
Okay.
Maybe we could talk about 4.
Perfect. Number 4. And as you can see, the system is designed in such a way that you can't elevate that constraint, because the developers are the most resource intense party in the system, right? You're the one that has material costs. Lawyers don't have material costs. Realtors don't have material costs. Regulators don't have material costs. Yeah, there's some operational costs. Everybody has their own operational costs. But the system, because you lack that language, the system in which you operate doesn't have a way for you, the developer, to communicate your experience to what other people experience. So in other words, right, your intuition is built around balancing material expenses with operational expenses. You pay for labor and material to not just the greatest degree, but almost an immeasurable degree to anybody else. Yeah, electricians pay for copper, but primarily it's their knowledge, right?
Sure. Mm-hmm.
You know, HVAC, yeah, they pay for HVAC systems, but it's primarily their knowledge of how to route and seal HVAC systems that makes their service more as valuable as it is. But in your particular case, I mean, you've got to find the subcontractors to lay and spend the materials on foundations and the vertical build construction materials. You're responsible for those material costs. I mean, it all falls on the developer, which explains why it is the developers act as quickly as they do, because there's a lot of cash outlay on the front.
Sure. Yeah.
For things that if things go south, which this is proven from 2008, from any sort of housing crunch, when the material costs are sunk costs and the material costs drastically decrease in value, you're the ones that lose out first. Although wildly, everybody ends up losing out in the end, right? So again, from a TOC perspective, that's your bottleneck. So in other words, in your production process, that material availability, that material fragility creates a bottleneck in the system that makes it hard for you to get help elevating the profitability of a novel construction type from everybody else downstream, right? Again, why do realtors and lawyers and insurers, and even to a smaller extent, the subcontractors, why do they have an interest in something that they don't experience in the same way that you do? So again, we have one more why question, apparently, because my counting skills are absolute garbage. I used to be able to count votes, can't even do that anymore. So here we go. Why does the development ecosystem have no natural mechanism for redistributing that innovation risk between the types of parties that exist and their different sets of experiences? Why is a developer's individual capacity the primary bottleneck for determining the speed at distributing the acceptability of this novel construction? I don't want to call it a novelty, but novel construction building. Why does the absence of a shared risk model mean that every professional discipline can easily walk away while the developer absorbs all the financial and material risk? Why does the current structure of the development industry make it nearly impossible to form a coalition of early adopters across all of these different disciplines? And why is the moment a developer's personal capacity is exceeded the precise moment the entire innovation system collapses around them, rather than triggering that redistribution of responsibility among willing participants? Which one of these stand out to you the most?
I would say that the one with the biggest sort of visceral impact is number 3, because that's such a real fear.
Okay. Perfect. Because it's a real fear among developers, right?
Yeah, I mean, your surveyor or your civil engineering firm could just say, no, we don't want to do this, and they'd walk away. And it could take you years to find a replacement with the local knowledge.
Yep. And this is where you start to see why it is that you, how many why questions have we gotten to? Let me just scroll through this real quick. Make sure that, because we're getting one more here. Oh, final question. Okay, again, I'm telling you, my counting is horrible. Anybody watching this, I will lose track of the 5 whys. Thankfully, the AI employee keeps track of it for me. That's, I guess, a bad byproduct of AI. But so we're starting to nail this down, right? The reason why it is that you're struggling so much is because you are literally the only one that is entirely and completely back-end loaded and material dependent. Right? Again, attorneys, realtors, I can speak to that. We're back-end loaded because we collect at closing, but we're not out any money. We're out time. Right. And that time is important to us. I'm not saying it's not important to us, but that's a different experience than you have. You're not just out time, you're out what we would call in TOC dollar days. Dollar days being the number of days that your total investment is wrapped up in the project, which for a project like this, your dollar days could be, you could be talking about, $50 million days for one particular property when you look at it that way.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it is a tremendous amount of investment and capital that you tie up that nobody else can wrap their head around because they're all service-based, expertise-based only. And that structural asymmetry explains perfectly why it is that the system itself can't elevate your construction type. It explains perfectly why it is that you can't have this conversation in the same amount of time or less than you would about traditional development methods. Because you're approaching it from a perspective that just doesn't match the perspective of anybody else. Does that seem like a rational explanation as to why you're having these struggles?
Sure. Yeah.
So the real trick at this point is and I don't think we need any more why questions at this point. But the real question is what is the most problematic assumption that you're making? And this is where we take this entire conversation. We can produce a report from it. We're going to take that entire report over to the new chat thread where it's going to help us identify the first step that you can take to change your language. Because I think the important thing to keep in mind here is that the novelty will not work until you change your language to speak in terms of the way your downstream partners have to hear it.
Okay.
Right? It both is a risk on your part, but it is your biggest opportunity. And so from a developer perspective, the developer that knows how to speak the language of their downstream, treat them as downstream customers. Your downstream customers, when you figure out how it is to get them to understand your language by speaking theirs, it gives you an incredible market advantage that nobody else has. And so create the final report so we can use it to identify our current reality tree and evaporating cloud. And that'll be what we do in the next chat. So
okay, cool.
At this point, this now tells you what you need to change, right? It isn't even the education. Like everybody you work with at this point understands profitability in real estate development. They understand their role, which you've already talked about. They understand measures of profitability in real estate development. Now your only struggle is how to get everything they understand to accept in a new perspective on thinking about it. And now we've identified that the perspective cannot be focused on your perspective of being both skill and material oriented, right? Your profitability model takes into account making money with those two things, whereas theirs doesn't. So now you have to develop that language that that helps them to see what you're seeing. And the current reality tree will show us the cause and effect between this root cause in the experiences and develop what we call an evaporating cloud. An evaporating cloud identifies the most problematic assumption you're making about the way the system works. And that's where your solution lies, is challenging that assumption and coming up with a series of solutions that allow you to effectively challenge that assumption the right way. So again, we're going to create a new chat and use a prompt that's similar to this. According to TOC principles, create me a diagram of the current reality tree and evaporating cloud based on the information I'm giving you here. And let me paste that in. Perfect. And then we'll let that thread kind of do its work.
Okay.
And the nice thing about all of this is that if it seems almost like too simplistic, if you're looking at this, and I'm talking to you specifically, but also anybody that might be watching at this point in the video, if you're looking at this and saying, man, it can't be that simple, yeah, it fucking can. It should be that simple. That's the reality, is that we look for complicated solutions because we have complicated experiences. But ultimately, the simplicity of treating the root cause and all of your solutions with the root cause will take care of all of these experiences that you have. In TOC, we call them undesirable effects. And this is oftentimes what people try to take action to resolve. But there's 900 different undesirable effects potentially. There's 900 intermediate effects. But the core constraint that there is no shared profitability language around the novel construction type that you're talking about tells you that you solve all these effects when you just identify what that shared language looks like, which means it takes you listening to what people need. It takes you actually going through the same process with people. It might very well be that your conversation has nothing to do with 3D printing in terms of telling them how it works. Your first conversation might very well be, tell me all of the reasons why you hate 3D printed homes. Or tell me all of the ways that 3D printed homes might make your life miserable. And just let them complain. Because the beauty about that is you can do exactly what I just did with you. They will teach you their language. And the real cool thing about what we did with you is you have two separate clouds here that would help you refine that solution, right? So what we call injections are the immediate actions that people take. And in your particular case, from the development side, you're talking about targeting your best, highest leveraging coalition partner and disproportionately focus on their benefit. Essentially develop a key opinion leader that doesn't necessarily share the same risks as you, but shares the same rewards to the degree that you do as the developer. And then just from an ecosystem perspective, you can also formalize a new model of profitability that is very easy for them to understand. So early adopter agreements, equity co-shares, co-development partners, whatever the law and regulatory frameworks allow you to do. I'm not telling you to do anything nefarious here, but give them skin in the game. Now they may not have the material skin that you have, but that's the same condition exists now. Give them more skin on the profitability side. Make it worth their time to be an early adopter. And combining these two, you can start to develop by making your coalition partner share in what you might consider a disproportionate amount of risk reward. You actually help them to have a reason to convince other people that have the same risk reward they have now. So in other words, this coalition partner is not materially invested, but now they're profit invested. Now they have a shared same experience with all of these other downstream partners that you have to rely on, from the crazy real estate agents like myself to the financiers and the insurers. You find a key partner who tells them the same experience that they're having. Now, all of a sudden, your key partner is being the translator. And so you focus all of your efforts at this point on finding that partner, helping them to help you develop that language, and then you as a team help educate the industry. You're now not having longer conversations with everybody. You're having a more purposeful, more focused conversation with one partner in this, who then helps you have shorter, clear, more focused conversations with everybody on down the line. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah.
Perfect. So that being said, I mean, that's the process, right? We're just at about an hour, and I think you have a clear path on what it is that you can do to go out there and get people to adopt this.
Yeah.
And you taught me a lot today about 3D printing.
It was a lot of thought-provoking, self-reflection. So good stuff.
Good. Yeah. And that's the thing about this, and why I'm going to start doing these things more routinely. I appreciate you being a guinea pig with this, is that people confuse business, and especially AI in business, with being these tech experts and having the secret tips and tricks that only I know. In reality here, we didn't do anything other than what good business people do, which is learn from one another and have a conversation and drill down to the simple thing that you can do. So I appreciate you being a guinea pig for this, because this is what we can do.
I appreciate you.
So do me a favor, message me your email. I'll get all this stuff to you tonight. I need a cup of coffee after doing this for 2 hours. And I'll get this stuff over to you. But anybody, if you watch this and you think, man, this is effing cool, let's get it done. Happy to do it. So, but thanks again, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Rob. I appreciate you helping me out.
Absolutely. Thanks, man. Talk to y'all later.
Take care.